Have you ever felt like you were meant for something greater, but your own choices kept pulling you away from your destiny? What if I told you that even the strongest person in the Bible, someone chosen by God before birth, fell not because of an army, but because of his own weaknesses? Samson was not just any man. He was a warrior unlike any the world had seen, blessed with supernatural strength. He tore apart lions with his bare hands, destroyed armies single-handedly, and struck fear into the heart of his enemies. And yet, despite his power, he fell into a trap that so many still fall into today: temptation, arrogance, and misplaced trust. But here's the real question. Could you be making the same mistakes Samson did? Could your own desires, your distractions, or the people around you be pulling you away from your true purpose? Today, we're going to uncover the rise and tragic fall of Samson, the strongest man in the Bible. But more than that, we're going to reveal the powerful lessons hidden in his story, lessons that can transform your spiritual life and help you avoid the same downfall. And before we dive in, take a moment and subscribe to this channel. Many people watch these videos but forget to subscribe. And you don't want to miss what's coming next, because by the end of this video, you'll understand not only how Samson lost everything, but also how God used him even in his final moments. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see your own journey forever. The land of Israel groaned under the iron grip of the Philistines. For 40 years, their rule spread over the promised land like a shadow, a consequence of Israel's own unfaithfulness to God. Cities were plundered, harvests stolen, and the name of the Almighty seemed forgotten. Yet, even in times of judgment, God remained faithful to his covenant. A deliverer was coming, but he would not rise as a king or a warrior trained from youth. No, his arrival was marked by something even more miraculous: his very birth. In the quiet village of Zorah, nestled within the tribe of Dan, lived a man named Manoah and his wife. They were righteous before the Lord but carried a deep sorrow. They had no children. In Israel's culture, barrenness was seen as a mark of disgrace, almost as if divine favor had been withheld. But as is often the case, what seemed like a curse was, in truth, the setup for a divine miracle. One day, as Manoah's wife went about her daily routine, a brilliant light filled her surroundings, and before her stood a being unlike any she had ever seen. His presence was majestic, his very form radiating power. He was no ordinary man, he was an angel of the Lord. With a voice like thunder wrapped in peace, he spoke, "You are barren and have had no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. However, he is set apart from birth. He must never drink wine or strong drink. He must never touch anything unclean, and his hair shall never be cut. For he shall be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. Through him, Israel's deliverance from the Philistines will begin." Judges 13:3-5. These words struck her heart like a fire of hope. Could it be true? Without hesitation, she ran to tell her husband. Manoah, hearing this incredible news, was filled with both wonder and uncertainty. This was no ordinary child. This was a divine calling. But how were they to raise him? How could they ensure they fulfilled God's plan? In his humility, Manoah did the only thing he knew to do. He prayed, "O Lord, let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we are to do with the child who will be born." Judges 13:8. And God, ever faithful, answered. The angel returned, and Manoah, falling before him in reverence, asked, "What will be the boy's way of life and his mission?" The angel reaffirmed the instructions. The boy was to remain holy, untouched by worldly defilement, because he was destined for a great purpose. Still in awe, Manoah sought to honor this heavenly messenger, offering to prepare a meal. But the angel refused, saying, "If you offer a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord." Only then did Manoah realize this was no mere prophet. This was an envoy from heaven itself. Trembling, he asked for his name, to which the angel replied, "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" Judges 13:18. As Manoah prepared the sacrifice, something extraordinary happened. The flames rose toward the sky, and the angel ascended within them, vanishing into the heavens. Overwhelmed, Manoah fell to the ground, fearing for his life. "We shall surely die, for we have seen God." But his wife, full of faith, gently reassured him. If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted our offering, nor revealed all these things to us. Judges 13:22-23. And so, in due time, the barren womb was filled with life. A child was born, and they named him Samson, a name that means like the sun. From his earliest days, it was clear he was no ordinary boy. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir him in Mahanadan, a region between Zorah and Eshtaol, Judges 13:25. His story was just beginning. As Samson grew into a young man, his strength was undeniable. The Spirit of the Lord stirred within him, and his presence alone commanded attention. Yet, for all his physical power, his heart was drawn to things that would lead him down a dangerous path. One day, as he traveled to the Philistine town of Timnah, something unexpected happened. He saw a woman, and his heart was immediately set on her. She was a Philistine, an outsider, part of the very people oppressing Israel. Still, he returned home and said to his parents, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." His parents were shocked. "Isn't there a woman among your own people?" they asked. Why would he choose a wife from among their enemies? But Samson was firm. "She is right in my eyes," he insisted. What neither he nor his parents fully understood at the time was that this was part of God's plan. The Lord was seeking an opportunity to confront the Philistines, and Samson was the instrument he would use. Judges 14:1-4. On his way to Timnah to arrange the marriage, something extraordinary happened. A young lion suddenly charged at him, roaring with all its might. But before the beast could strike, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson, and his strength surged beyond human limits. With nothing but his bare hands, he grabbed the lion and tore it apart as if it were no more than a small goat. Blood stained the ground, and silence fell over the valley. Yet, he told no one what had happened. He simply continued on his way, as if such a feat was of little concern to him. Sometime later, as he passed by that same spot, curiosity led him back to the lion's carcass. To his surprise, a swarm of bees had made a hive inside the remains, and golden honey dripped from within. Without hesitation, he reached in, scooped up the honey, and ate it. It was sweet, almost unnaturally so. He even took some to his parents, but he didn't tell them where it came from. Why? Because as a Nazirite, he was forbidden from touching anything dead. This small act, seemingly insignificant, foreshadowed something deeper. Samson had incredible power, but he also had a reckless disregard for the divine laws that set him apart. Judges 14:8-9. The time came for his wedding feast in Timnah, and according to Philistine custom, a celebration lasting 7 days was held. The Philistines, ever suspicious of this strong Hebrew among them, sent 30 men to accompany him. It was then that Samson, in a moment of confidence, perhaps even arrogance, proposed a challenge, a riddle. "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet," he told them. If they could solve it within the 7 days of the feast, he would give them 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. But if they failed, they would owe him the same. Judges 14:12-14. The Philistines were stumped. No matter how much they thought about it, they could not figure out his riddle. Frustrated and growing desperate, they turned to Samson's wife and threatened her. "Coax your husband into explaining the riddle to us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death." Judges 14:15. Fearing for her life, she pleaded with Samson. Day after day, she wept and begged, pressing him relentlessly. "If you truly love me, why won't you tell me?" she cried. The constant pressure became unbearable. On the 7th day, exhausted and frustrated, Samson gave in and told her the answer. That evening, just before the deadline, the Philistines came to him with smug smiles. "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" they declared. Immediately, Samson knew he had been betrayed. His face darkened, and his voice carried a dangerous edge as he responded, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." Judges 14:18. Furious and humiliated, Samson stormed off to the Philistine city of Ashkelon, where he killed 30 men, stripped them of their garments, and used them to pay his debt. But the betrayal still burned inside him. Overcome with anger, he left his wife behind and returned to his father's house. But the Philistines were not done with him. As an insult, they gave his wife to another man, one of his own wedding guests. Judges 14:19-20. When Samson learned of this, later his fury ignited again. This time, his revenge was swift and devastating. He captured 300 foxes, tied torches to their tails, and released them into the Philistine fields, setting their crops, vineyards, and olive groves ablaze. The damage was catastrophic, and the Philistines, enraged, sought vengeance. Judges 15:1-5. But this was no longer just about a failed marriage. This was about war, vengeance, and a man whose strength could shake nations. Samson had drawn first blood, and the Philistines would not rest until they had their revenge. Edemo, agravu escrever sabra o tercero typico. The Philistines did not take Samson's revenge lightly. The destruction of their crops was an act of war, and they were determined to make him pay. In retaliation, they committed a brutal atrocity. They went to Timnah and burned Samson's wife and her father to death, the very threat they had used against her before. Judges 15:6. When Samson heard of this, something inside him snapped. This was no longer just a matter of personal insult. It was blood for blood. He vowed vengeance, and with a fury unlike anything before, he struck down countless Philistines, unleashing his raw power upon them. But the Philistines were not done. They regrouped and marched into Judah, demanding that the Israelites hand over Samson. The men of Judah, fearing the wrath of their Philistine oppressors, sent 3,000 men to find him. They approached him in the cave of Edom and pleaded, "Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What have you done to us?" Samson, unshaken, replied, "I have done to them as they did to me." Judges 15:11. The men of Judah, unwilling to risk a full-scale war, told Samson they had come to bind him and turn him over to the Philistines. He made them swear that they would not kill him themselves. They agreed, bound him with 2 new ropes, and led him to the Philistine camp. The Philistines, seeing their greatest enemy tied up and delivered into their hands, erupted in celebration. But their victory was short-lived. As they advanced toward him, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson once more, and his strength returned like a rushing wind. The ropes binding him snapped as if they were burned threads. Looking around, he saw the fresh jawbone of a donkey on the ground. Without hesitation, he grabbed it and turned on his enemies. What followed was pure devastation. Samson slaughtered 1,000 Philistine warriors with nothing but that bone in his hand. The ground was soaked in blood, and his enemies lay lifeless around him. When it was over, Samson cast the jawbone aside and, exhausted, cried out, "With a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have slain 1,000 men." Judges 15:16. But even the strongest man has limits. After the battle, Samson was overcome with thirst. His body, though powerful, was still human. He looked around and saw nothing but the remnants of war, broken weapons, lifeless bodies, and dust settling over the battlefield. His throat burned, and for the first time in a long while, he felt vulnerable. He lifted his eyes to heaven and cried out, "You have given me this great victory, but now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Judges 15:18. And God, ever merciful, answered. Right before Samson's eyes, the ground split open and fresh water gushed forth from the earth. He fell to his knees, drinking deeply, feeling his strength return with every sip. He named that place En-Hakkore, which means the spring of him who called. Judges 15:19. For 20 years, Samson ruled as a judge over Israel. His name alone struck fear into the hearts of the Philistines. No army could defeat him, no weapon could bring him down. But for all his might, Samson had yet to face his greatest enemy, his own desires. For years, Samson had been unstoppable. No army could defeat him, no warrior could match his strength. But his greatest weakness was not an army or a sword, it was his own heart. His desire for foreign women had led him into dangerous territory before, but nothing would compare to what awaited him in the valley of Sorek. There, he met a woman named Delilah. She was captivating, mysterious, and unlike any woman he had ever known. Samson, the strongest man alive, found himself entangled in something far more dangerous than battle. He was trapped in the embrace of a woman whose loyalty had a price. The Philistine rulers saw their opportunity and approached her with an irresistible offer: 1,100 pieces of silver from each of them, if she could uncover the secret of Samson's strength. Judges 16:4-5. Delilah played her part well. With sweet words and lingering touches, she began to press Samson for answers. "Tell me the secret of your great strength, and how you can be tied up and subdued," she whispered. Samson, amused, decided to toy with her. "If I were tied with 7 fresh bowstrings that have never been dried, I would become as weak as any other man," he said. Delilah wasted no time. She told the Philistines, and that night, while Samson slept, she tied him with the bowstrings. Then she called out, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." With a single flex of his muscles, the bowstrings snapped like threads before a flame. The Philistines, hiding nearby, fled in terror. But Delilah was not finished. She pouted, she pleaded, she accused him of not loving her. Day after day, she tormented him with her questions, trying again and again with new tricks. First, he told her that new ropes would render him powerless. Then, he claimed that weaving his hair into a loom would take away his strength. Each time, Delilah tested his words, and each time, Samson broke free effortlessly. Judges 16:6-14. But Delilah was relentless. She did not just ask, she wore him down. She used the oldest weapon in the book: persistence. Day after day, she nagged and pleaded, pressing him until he could take it no longer. The Bible says that she pressed him daily with her words and urged him, so that his soul was vexed to death. Judges 16:16. And so, in a moment of exhaustion, Samson finally broke. He revealed the truth. "No razor has ever touched my head," he confessed, "for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." Judges 16:17. Delilah knew, this time, he was telling the truth. That night, she lulled him to sleep on her lap. As he lay there, resting in the arms of the woman who had sold him out, she summoned a man to shave off his 7 braids. With each strand that fell, Samson's destiny unraveled. Then she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke as before, ready to shake off his enemies. But this time something was different. He tried to rise, but his body felt heavy. He reached for his strength, but it was gone. And then, in a chilling moment of realization, Samson understood. The Lord had left him. Judges 16:20. The Philistines seized him. There was no battle, no struggle. Samson, the mighty warrior, was powerless. And as if to erase any trace of his former glory, they gouged out his eyes, leaving him blind and broken. They bound him in bronze chains and dragged him to Gaza, the very city where he once tore off its gates in defiance. But this time, there was no escape. He was thrown into prison, forced to grind grain like a common slave. Yet, in the darkness of his cell, something began to change. His hair, slowly but surely, started to grow back. Samson had once been the terror of the Philistines, the man whose strength no army could break. But now he was a prisoner, blind and humiliated, reduced to grinding grain like an ox. The once mighty warrior, who had slain 1,000 men with a donkey's jawbone, now walked in endless circles, bound by the very enemies he once dominated. But the Philistines were not satisfied with simply capturing him. They wanted to make a spectacle of his downfall. They wanted to turn their greatest enemy into the centerpiece of their victory. So on a day of grand celebration, They gathered in the temple of their god, Dagon. The rulers of the Philistines, along with 3,000 men and women, filled the temple and its rooftop, laughing and rejoicing. They praised Dagon, declaring that he had delivered Samson into their hands. Judges 16:23-24. Drunk with pride and wine, they called for Samson. They wanted to see him, to mock him, to parade him before the crowd as a defeated enemy. A young boy was given the task of guiding the blind warrior into the temple. As the echoes of laughter and jeers filled the air, Samson whispered to the boy, "Place my hands on the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean on them." Judges 16:26. The boy obeyed, unaware of what was about to unfold. Then, in that moment of deepest humiliation, Samson did something he had not done in a long time. He prayed, with a heart no longer filled with arrogance, but with desperation and faith. He called upon the Lord. "O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me just this once, that I may take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Judges 16:28. A new kind of strength coursed through his body, not just the raw power of before, but the strength of a man who finally understood his dependence on God. His hands gripped the pillars. He planted his feet firmly on the ground. And then, with everything he had left, Samson pushed. The temple shook. The great pillars cracked. The laughter turned to screams as the walls trembled. The Philistine rulers, their greatest champions, the thousands who had come to witness Samson's humiliation, all of them realized, too late, what was happening. With one final surge of strength, Samson brought the entire temple crashing down. The stone columns collapsed, the roof caved in, and the mighty temple of Dagon was reduced to rubble. And in that moment, Samson achieved in death what he had never done in life. He wiped out more Philistines in his final act than he had in all his battles combined. Judges 16:30. The dust settled, and the echoes of destruction faded. Israel's greatest warrior lay buried beneath the ruins, but his legacy was sealed. His family came and retrieved his body, laying him to rest in the tomb of his father, Manoah. He had judged Israel for 20 years, and though his life was marked by strength and weakness, by triumph and failure, his story became eternal. Samson's name would be remembered, not just as the strongest man in the Bible, but as a man whose journey from power to betrayal, from humiliation to redemption, became a testament to God's ability to use even the flawed for His divine purpose. Samson's story is a powerful reminder that strength alone is never enough. He had a divine calling, supernatural power, and endless victories. Yet in the end, his greatest enemy was himself. His desires, his recklessness, and his misplaced trust led to his downfall. But even in his final moments, when everything seemed lost, God still used him for a greater purpose. And now, I want to hear from you. What part of Samson's story impacted you the most? Do you see any lessons in his journey that apply to your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading and responding to as many as I can. If this video spoke to you, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next powerful teaching. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video with them. It might be exactly what they need today. Thank you for being here with me. May God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.